Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Face in the Crowd. Barrett Novak had built his career on exposing lies. As an investigative documentary filmmaker, he'd spent 12 years peeling back the carefully constructed facades of con artists, corrupt politicians, and corporate fraudsters. His work had earned him 3 regional Emmys and a reputation for relentless persistence. But he'd never imagined the biggest deception of his life was sleeping beside him every night. The Saturday afternoon at Riverside Mall started ordinarily enough. Barrett was there to pick up camera equipment from a specialty shop, his mind already on his next project about pharmaceutical fraud. The food court hummed with weekend crowds, families, teenagers, the usual chaos. That's when he saw him. The boy stood near the pretzel stand, laughing at something on his phone. 15, maybe 16. Dark hair that fell across his forehead in the exact way Barrett's did in old photos. The same sharp jawline Barrett's father had passed down. The distinctive Novak nose, slightly crooked from a break generations back. The boy's laugh carried across the noise, and Barrett's blood went cold. He knew that laugh. It was his own. Barrett's wife, Jolene, had told him their son died at birth 15 years ago. Stillborn. He'd held her while she sobbed in that hospital room, his own grief drowning him. They'd never tried again. Jolene said she couldn't bear the pain of another loss. Barrett had respected that, had buried his own longing for fatherhood, had convinced himself their life together was enough. But this boy was alive, and he was Barrett's son. He felt it in his bones. The boy grabbed his shopping bags and headed toward the exit. Barrett followed, his journalist instincts taking over. He maintained distance, casual but focused. The boy climbed into a silver Honda with an older woman behind the wheel. Barrett photographed the license plate with his phone and continued following his own car, several vehicles back. They drove to Maple Ridge, a middle-class neighborhood about 20 minutes from Barrett's own home. The boy got out, waved goodbye to the woman, and walked up the driveway of a modest 2-story house. A different woman opened the door, tall, dark-haired, her face breaking into a warm smile as she hugged the boy. Barrett's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He knew that face. Maura Hancock, Jolene's best friend since college. The woman who'd been at their wedding, at their anniversary parties, at their home for countless dinners. The woman who'd cried with Jolene at the hospital 15 years ago, or so he'd thought. Barrett parked down the street and approached the house. His heart hammered, but his mind was sharp, calculating. He'd confronted hundreds of liars in his career. This would be no different. He rang the doorbell. Maura opened the door, and the color drained from her face like water through a sieve. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Behind her, Barrett could hear the boy's voice calling out, "Mom, who is it?" "Maura," Barrett said quietly, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "I think we need to talk." Her hands trembled. "Barrett, She told me you'd never find out. She promised." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Behind Maura, the boy appeared curious. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. This wasn't coincidence. This was his son. Chapter 2. The First Cracks. Barrett didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stood there, his camera-trained gaze boring into Maura until she stepped aside, her face crumbling. The boy, Derek, she'd called him moments before in a panicked whisper, looked between them confused. "Derek, honey, go to your room," Maura said, her voice breaking. "But Mom, now." The boy's face hardened with teenage defiance, but he retreated upstairs, his footsteps heavy on the wooden stairs. Barrett heard a door slam. Inside the living room, Barrett remained standing. Maura collapsed onto the couch, her hands covering her face. The room was decorated with photos, Maura and Derek at various ages. Baseball games, birthday parties, school pictures. 15 years of a life Barrett should have lived. "Start talking," Barrett said. His voice was ice. "And don't you dare lie to me." Maura's hands shook as she lowered them. Tears streaked her face, but Barrett felt no sympathy. "I can't. Jolene made me promise. She'll destroy me if I—" "She already destroyed me," Barrett cut in. 15 years ago. And you helped her. So you're going to tell me everything? Or I'm calling the police right now for kidnapping." It wasn't kidnapping. Mora's voice rose in panic. She gave him to me. I couldn't have children, Barrett. The doctor said it was impossible. When Jolene got pregnant and said she couldn't, she didn't want. The words caught in her throat. Barrett's jaw clenched. Didn't want what? A baby. Mora's voice dropped to a whisper. She'd just gotten the promotion to senior architect at Morrison & Wright. She said motherhood would destroy everything she'd worked for. She was going to have an abortion, but I begged her. I told her I'd take the baby, raise him as mine, and no one would ever know. The room seemed to tilt. Barrett gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. In the hospital, the stillbirth, she bribed a nurse. Dr. Francis Warner owed her a favor. Jolene had designed Warner's medical complex for free. They faked the records, said the baby was stillborn. Jolene delivered Derek, handed him to me, and walked away. Mora's voice was hollow. She visited a few times the first year, but then she said it was too risky, too painful. She asked me to move away, start fresh somewhere you'd never accidentally see us. But you didn't move. I couldn't afford to. And Jolene, she stopped helping financially after the first 2 years. Said she'd done her part. Bitterness crept into Mora's voice. Meanwhile, she went on with her perfect life, perfect career, perfect marriage, perfect lie. Barrett's mind raced, piecing it together with the cold precision that made him an exceptional investigator. And me? She watched me grieve for a child who was alive. Mora wouldn't meet his eyes. She said you'd never understand, that you'd force her to give up her career, that you'd make her be someone she wasn't. So she made me a widower of a ghost. Barrett's voice was barely audible, more dangerous in its quietness than any shout. And you went along with it. For 15 years. I wanted a child. Mora's voice broke. I would have done anything. You stole my son. The words landed like a physical blow. Mora flinched, tears streaming freely now. I gave him a good life. I love him. He's happy. Built on a lie. Barrett pulled out his phone. I'm a documentary filmmaker, Mora. Do you know what I do? I expose fraud. I unravel conspiracies. And I never, ever lose. He started typing. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me everything. Dates, documents, everyone involved. The nurse. The doctor. Bank records showing Jolene's payments. Everything. She'll sue me. She'll take Derek away. She should never have had him to begin with. Barrett's composure finally cracked, his voice rising. That's my son upstairs. My blood. And you both stole 15 years from me. Mora sobbed, her entire body shaking. Upstairs, Barrett heard a door open. Derek was listening. Good. The boy deserved to know the truth, too. Barrett lowered his voice again, cold and controlled. You have a choice, Mora. Help me expose what Jolene did, or go down with her. Because I'm burning this lie to the ground, and you're either with me or you're ash. Chapter 3. The Deeper Truth. Barrett didn't go home that night. He couldn't face Jolene yet, not without every piece of the puzzle. Instead, he checked into a hotel and opened his laptop, doing what he did best, investigating. Mora had cracked faster than he'd expected. Fear of losing Derek had overwhelmed her loyalty to Jolene. She'd given him copies of everything. Birth certificates, the original hospital records before they were altered, text messages Jolene had sent over the years threatening to take Derek back if Mora ever talked. There were financial records showing Jolene's payments to Dr. Francis Warner and a nurse named Nina Ferguson. The conspiracy was documented, almost as if Jolene had been too arrogant to think anyone would ever connect the dots. But as Barrett dug deeper, cross-referencing dates and financial transactions, a new pattern emerged, one that made his blood run colder. 3 months before Jolene's pregnancy, her mother, Agnes Simmons, had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Agnes was wealthy, a real estate mogul who'd built an empire from nothing. Her will had been straightforward. Her entire estate, worth approximately $12 million, would be divided equally among her children. But there was one clause that changed everything. Barrett found it in a scanned copy of the will buried in public records. Any grandchild born of my daughter Jolene Novak shall inherit an additional trust of $4 million to be managed by the child's mother until the child reaches age 18. The dates aligned perfectly. Agnes died 4 months after Derek's supposed stillbirth. Jolene had attended the funeral, played the grieving daughter who'd lost both mother and child. She'd inherited her share of the estate, $4 million, but the additional $4 million trust dissolved since there was no living grandchild. Except there was. Derek was alive, hidden away with Maura. Barrett leaned back, the hotel room suddenly too small. Jolene hadn't just given up their son because of her career. She'd done it to prevent him from inheriting money she wanted for herself. She'd stolen from her own child. His phone rang. It was his investigator friend, Devin Levy, a former FBI agent who sometimes helped with Barrett's documentaries. "You working on something without me, Novak?" Devin's voice was gruff, but friendly. "I need your help," Barrett said. "Off the books. That kind of case, huh? What do you need?" "Background check on Dr. Francis Warner and Nurse Nina Ferguson. Specifically, what Jolene Novak might have had on them 15 years ago." Barrett paused. "And I need you to find out if there are any other victims. If they did this for Jolene, they might have done it for others." Devin whistled low. "How deep does this go?" "Deeper than I thought." Over the next 3 days, Barrett barely slept. He synchronized with Devin, built a timeline, gathered evidence. He drove back to Maura's house and sat down with Derek, who'd learned the truth from his mother's tearful confession. The boy was angry, confused, hurt, but also curious. Barrett showed him photos of himself at 15, and Derek's eyes widened at the resemblance. They talked for hours. Barrett learned his son loved baseball, wanted to be an engineer, hated horror movies. All the small details he'd missed. "Are you going to take me away from my mom?" Derek asked finally, his voice small. Barrett looked at Maura, who sat anxiously nearby. "Your mom loves you. She made terrible choices, but she gave you a good life." He turned back to Derek. "I'm not here to destroy your world. I'm here to give you the truth, and to make sure the person who started all this faces what she's done." Devin called on the 4th day with explosive news. "You're not going to believe this. Warner and Ferguson, they've been running a black market adoption ring for years. Your case was just the beginning. They've falsified at least 8 birth certificates, declared live babies stillborn, and sold them to desperate couples. We're talking felony fraud, kidnapping charges, the works." Barrett felt sick. Jolene knew about this. Based on the evidence, she might have been their first client, their prototype. They perfected the system after her. Barrett ended the call and stared at the evidence spread across the hotel room. He had everything he needed. Bank records, medical fraud, witness testimony, a conspiracy that stretched far beyond one lie. But the question remained, how to make Jolene pay in a way that was as devastating to her as her betrayal had been to him. That's when the plan crystallized. Barrett smiled for the first time in days, a cold, calculated expression that his documentary subjects would have recognized. The smile of a predator who'd found his prey. He picked up his phone and called his producer at the network. "Tanya," he said, "I've got a story for you, but this one's personal." Chapter 4, Building the Case. Barrett spent the next week living a double life. During the day, he returned home, acting as if nothing had changed. He kissed Jolene goodbye in the mornings, asked about her day over dinner, slept beside her at night. The performance required every ounce of his professional discipline, but he'd spent years interviewing criminals who'd looked him in the eye and lied. He knew how to hide what he was feeling. What Jolene didn't know was that Barrett was recording everything. Tiny cameras hidden in their home, audio recorders in his pocket, every conversation logged, every reaction documented. He was building not just a legal case, but a narrative, the kind that would destroy her reputation as thoroughly as she destroyed his trust. At night, after Jolene fell asleep, Barrett would slip into his home office and work on the documentary. His producer, Tanya Mann, had greenlit the project immediately. The Stillborn Lie, they were calling it. An expose of medical fraud, illegal adoptions, and family betrayal. It would premiere in 3 weeks on their national network. But Barrett wasn't just making a documentary. He was orchestrating a reckoning. Devin had delivered more evidence than Barrett had hoped for. Dr. Francis Warner and Nurse Nina Ferguson had falsified 9 births over 15 years. They'd created an underground network selling babies to wealthy couples who couldn't adopt through legal channels. Warner had lost her medical license in another state years ago for malpractice, then reinvented herself. The bodies were buried deep, but Devin had dug them all up. The FBI was now involved building their own case. But Devin had convinced them to wait until after Barrett's documentary aired. Let him expose it publicly first, Devin had argued. The pressure will make them all turn on each other faster. Barrett's most delicate work, however, was with Derek. The boy deserved to know the full truth, but Barrett moved carefully, building trust. They met at a batting cage across town, where Barrett taught Derek how to perfect his swing, the same way Barrett's father had taught him. "Why didn't she want me?" Derek asked one afternoon, his voice cracking. Barrett caught the ball Derek had missed, turning it over in his hands. "Your mother, Jolene, she valued her ambitions more than anything else. That's not your fault. That's her emptiness. Maura says she was just scared. Maura's making excuses." Barrett looked directly at his son. Being scared doesn't justify lying for 15 years. It doesn't justify stealing your inheritance or denying you your real family. You deserved better. Derek swung hard, connecting with the ball with a satisfying crack. "What are you going to do to her?" Barrett smiled that cold smile again. "I'm going to expose exactly who she is. To everyone." The trap Barrett was setting was multi-layered. He convinced Maura to wear a wire during her next meeting with Jolene. A meeting Barrett had orchestrated by having Maura send a panicked text claiming Derek was asking questions about his father. The meeting took place at a coffee shop. Barrett sat in a van nearby, headphones on, recording every word. "You have to be more careful," Jolene hissed at Maura. "We agreed he'd never know. He's 15, Jolene. He's asking why he doesn't look like me. Why there's no father in the picture. So lie better. That's what you signed up for. I didn't sign up to steal a child's inheritance." Maura's voice rose, and Barrett felt a grim satisfaction. She was following the script he'd given her perfectly. Agnes's will specified $4 million for Derek. "Where is it?" There was silence. Then Jolene's voice, colder than Barrett had ever heard it. "That money was better served investing in my career. Derek's been fine without it. It wasn't yours to take. I gave you a child when you couldn't have one. That's payment enough." Jolene's chair scraped. "If you expose this, Maura, I'll destroy you. I'll claim you kidnapped him. I'll make sure you never see Derek again." Barrett had what he needed. A confession. Threat. Evidence of the financial fraud. Chapter 5. The Woman Behind the Mask. Barrett needed more than just evidence for the documentary. He needed context, background, the why behind Jolene's betrayal. So he did what he did best. He investigated his own wife. What he found painted a picture he'd never fully seen. Jolene Simmons had grown up in her mother Agnes's shadow. Agnes was a force of nature, a self-made millionaire who dominated every room she entered. She'd raised her children with iron discipline and impossible standards. Jolene's older sister, Sharon Collier, had rebelled and been cut off. Jolene had conformed, excelled, and still never felt it was enough. Barrett found journals Jolene had hidden in her office at work. He'd used his documentary credentials to gain access, claiming to be researching architectural practices. The journals revealed a woman consumed by the need to prove herself. Every achievement was measured against her mother's expectations. Every success felt hollow. When Jolene discovered she was pregnant, the entries became frantic. "I can't do this. I can't be her. I won't give up everything I've worked for to become a mother." Like she was distant, critical, never satisfied. "I'd rather not be a mother at all." But there was more. Barrett found emails between Jolene and a man named Preston Fitzpatrick, one of her colleagues at the architecture firm. The affair had started a year before Derek's birth and continued for months after. The emails were passionate, obsessive, and made clear that Preston wanted Jolene to leave Barrett. "You're wasting your life with him," Preston had written. "He's content with his small documentaries and smaller ambitions. You deserve someone who matches your drive." Jolene had responded, "I can't leave him yet. Not until I have the inheritance secured. Once mother's gone and the money's transferred, I'll be free." Barrett read the email 3 times, each word a fresh cut. She'd stayed with him for financial security while planning her exit. The pregnancy had complicated things, threatened her timeline. So she'd eliminated the complication. He traced Preston Fitzpatrick's current location, still at the same architecture firm, now a senior partner. Still in Jolene's life, attending the same professional conferences. The affair had never truly ended. It had just gone underground. Barrett added Preston to his list of targets. He also dug into Jolene's sister, Sharon. They'd been estranged for years, but Barrett tracked her down to a small art gallery she owned upstate. He drove there on a Saturday, finding a woman who looked like an older, more worn version of Jolene. "I wondered if you'd show up eventually," Sharon said when Barrett introduced himself. "She finally screw you over too?" Over coffee, Sharon revealed the family history Barrett had never known. Agnes had been abusive, emotionally manipulative, pitting her daughters against each other. Jolene had survived by becoming exactly what their mother wanted. Sharon had survived by refusing to play the game. "When Agnes died, Jolene didn't even tell me," Sharon said bitterly. "I found out from the obituary. And the will? She made sure I got nothing. Said I'd abandoned the family." Sharon looked at Barrett with sad eyes. "Whatever Jolene did to you, believe me, it wasn't personal. She destroys everyone eventually. It's all she knows." Barrett left with a deeper understanding, but no sympathy. Jolene's damaged past didn't excuse her choices. If anything, it made them more calculated. She knew exactly what she was doing when she gave Derek away. Chapter 6. The Pieces Fall into Place. 2 weeks before the documentary premiere, Barrett met with his legal team. He'd hired the best attorney in the state, Ray Cobb, a bulldog of a lawyer known for family law cases. "You have enough to sue for full custody," Ray said, reviewing the evidence. "Between the fraud, the hidden inheritance, and the kidnapping." "Not kidnapping," Barrett interrupted. "More as cooperating. I want her to retain some custody rights. She raised Derek. She loves him." Ray raised an eyebrow. "You're being generous to an accomplice." "I'm being fair to my son." Barrett leaned forward. "Derek's world is already being destroyed. I won't take away the only mother he's known unless I have to. Maura made terrible choices, but she did it out of desperation, not malice. And Jolene gets nothing." Barrett's voice was steel. "I want the house, full custody, and I want her to return every cent of Derek's inheritance, with interest. $4 million becomes $8 million over 15 years. And I want her criminally charged as an accessory to Warner and Ferguson's adoption fraud ring." Ray whistled. "You're not playing around. She destroyed 15 years of my life. She stole my son. She embezzled his inheritance." Barrett pulled out a flash drive. "And this is my insurance policy." The flash drive contained the full documentary, 90 minutes of devastating evidence. Interviews with Maura, Derek, Devin's investigation into Warner and Ferguson, financial records, the coffee shop recording, and Barrett's own narration tying it all together. It was journalistic excellence and personal vendetta wrapped into one. But the final piece was the most damaging. Barrett had interviewed Jolene herself 2 days ago. He'd come home with a camera crew, claiming he was doing a retrospective piece on architects who'd overcome personal tragedy. Jolene had agreed readily, eager for the publicity. She'd sat in their living room, perfectly composed, and talked about her career, her success, and the devastating stillbirth that had nearly broken her. "It was the hardest thing I've ever gone through," Jolene had said to the camera, tears glistening perfectly in her eyes. "But Barrett was so strong. He helped me survive it. We survived it together." Barrett had nodded sympathetically from behind the camera, letting her perform, letting her lie to millions of future viewers. Because when the documentary cut from her tearful interview to footage of Derek, alive, healthy, playing baseball, the lie would become undeniable. The day before the premiere, Barrett made his final move. He'd invited Jolene's entire professional circle to a private screening, her firm, colleagues, clients. He'd told them it was a special documentary about architecture and family, a surprise for Jolene. He'd also invited the FBI, ready to make arrests as soon as the credits rolled. And he'd invited Derek, who sat beside him now as they waited for the screening to begin. "You sure you're ready for this?" Barrett asked his son quietly. Derek nodded, his jaw set in a way that reminded Barrett of himself. "I want to see her face when everyone knows what she did." Barrett squeezed his shoulder. The lights dimmed. On the screen, the title appeared, The Stillborn Lie, a documentary by Barrett Novak. Jolene sat in the front row, smiling, expecting a celebration. She had no idea her entire world was about to collapse. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. The documentary began with soft music and a black screen. Then Barrett's voice. 15 years ago, I lost my son. Or so I was told. Jolene's smile faltered slightly as her own face appeared on screen. The interview from 2 days ago. Her rehearsed tears. Her perfect lies about the stillbirth. The audience watched silently, confused about where this was going. Then the screen cut to Derek standing in a baseball field. My name is Derek Hancock. Until 3 weeks ago, I didn't know my real father was alive. I didn't know my mother had given me away at birth. I didn't know I'd been stolen from a life I should have lived. The room erupted in whispers. Jolene's head whipped around, searching for Barrett. He met her eyes from the back of the room and saw the moment understanding hit her. Terror, rage, calculation. She started to stand, but Devin Levy, sitting beside her in plain clothes, put a firm hand on her shoulder. I think you should watch, Devin said quietly. The documentary was merciless. It showed the medical records before and after the falsification. It showed the financial transactions to Warner and Ferguson. It revealed the adoption fraud ring, with photos of 8 other families torn apart by lies. It showed Barrett's investigation, his discovery, his confrontation with Maura. And then it showed the coffee shop recording. Jolene's voice, crystal clear, that money was better served investing in my career. Derek's been fine without it. The audience gasped. Barrett watched Jolene's colleagues lean away from her, their faces twisting with disgust and shock. He watched Preston Fitzpatrick, sitting 3 rows back, go pale. But Barrett had saved the most damaging revelation for last. The documentary showed the emails between Jolene and Preston, their affair, her calculated plan to leave Barrett once she secured the inheritance. It showed how she'd used the tragedy of the stillbirth to garner sympathy, advance her career, win clients who wanted to support someone who'd overcome such loss. Every achievement in her professional life had been built on a lie that had stolen $4 million from her own child. The final shot of the documentary was Barrett and Derek sitting together on a bench, sunlight streaming between them. What do you want people to know? Barrett asked his son on camera. Derek looked directly into the lens. That lies don't just hurt in the moment. They steal time you can never get back. 15 years. Birthdays. Baseball games. Just being a family. His voice cracked. She chose money and a career over me. That's who she is. The screen went black. The credits rolled in silence. When the lights came up, Jolene was on her feet, her face a mask of fury. This is slander. This is the truth, Barrett said, walking down the aisle toward her. Every word documented. Every claim backed by evidence. You can try to deny it, but the FBI is here to arrest Dr. Warner and Nurse Ferguson, and you're implicated as a conspirator. As if on cue, federal agents entered from the side doors. The audience scrambled back as the agents moved toward Jolene. Mrs. Jolene Novak, one agent said, you're under investigation for conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of records, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. This is insane. Jolene's voice rose to a shriek. Barrett, you bastard, you set me up. I exposed you. Barrett corrected, his voice calm. There's a difference. You set yourself up 15 years ago. Preston Fitzpatrick tried to slip out the back, but Devin blocked his path. Mr. Fitzpatrick? The FBI wants to talk to you too. Seems you knew about the fraud and failed to report it. That makes you an accessory. The room descended into chaos. Clients were shouting questions. Jolene's boss from the architecture firm stood, his face red with rage. You're fired, Jolene. Security will escort you out tomorrow to collect your personal items. Barrett turned to find Derek standing beside him, watching his biological mother's public destruction with a mixture of pain and relief. You okay? Barrett asked. I will be, Derek said. Chapter 8. The Confrontation. The arrests took hours. Warner and Ferguson were taken into custody first, both of them breaking down immediately and offering to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. They gave up names, other doctors involved, other families affected. The adoption fraud ring was bigger than anyone had imagined. Jolene, however, remained defiant. She refused to answer questions, demanded her lawyer, and shot Barrett looks of pure hatred as she was led away for questioning. The documentary aired nationally 3 days later. The response was explosive. Hashtag #StillbornLie trended on social media. News outlets picked up the story. Barrett's network saw record viewership. Victim families came forward, adding their stories to the pile. Warner and Ferguson faced dozens of charges. But Barrett's battle wasn't over. While the criminal case built against Jolene, he still had to face her in civil court for custody and the stolen inheritance. The hearing took place 2 weeks after the arrests. The courtroom was packed with media. Judge Eldon Rush, known for his no-nonsense approach to family law, presided. Ray Cobb presented Barrett's case with surgical precision. The evidence was overwhelming. Jolene had knowingly defrauded her own child, stolen his inheritance, and maintained the lie for 15 years. She'd shown no remorse, only anger at being caught. Jolene's lawyer, a slick corporate attorney named Timmy McCullough, tried to argue that Jolene had been young, scared, and made a mistake. She's willing to make amends, McCullough said. She wants a relationship with her son. Does she? Judge Rush interrupted. He looked at Jolene. Mrs. Novak, in 15 years, did you ever attempt to tell your husband the truth? Did you ever try to contact your son? Jolene's composure cracked. I thought it was better this way. Better for whom? The judge's voice was sharp. You embezzled $4 million from your own child. You defrauded your husband. You participated in a criminal conspiracy that destroyed multiple families. He leaned back. I've read the case files. I've watched the documentary. I've heard the recordings. Mrs. Novak, you are perhaps the most calculating defendant I've seen in 30 years on this bench. Barrett watched Jolene flinch, her perfect facade crumbling. Full custody is awarded to Barrett Novak, Judge Rush declared. Jolene Novak is ordered to return the sum of $8 million. The original $4 million inheritance plus 15 years of accrued interest and damages to a trust for Derek Hancock to be managed by his father. Additionally, Mrs. Novak will have no custody or visitation rights unless Derek himself, upon reaching adulthood, chooses to establish contact. The gavel fell. Jolene's face went white. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm forwarding this case to the district attorney with a recommendation for criminal charges. Mrs. Novak, you may have thought you were above consequences. You were wrong. As Jolene was led from the courtroom, she finally looked at Derek, who sat in the front row beside Maura. Derek, please. But Derek turned away. He made his choice. Outside the courthouse, Barrett was swarmed by media. He made a brief statement. This was never about revenge. It was about justice. My son deserved the truth. Every child does. Preston Fitzpatrick was also charged as an accessory. His career at the architecture firm ended the same day. The affair, the knowledge of fraud, his role in encouraging Jolene's deception, it all came out. He faced both criminal charges and a civil suit from his own family. Warner and Ferguson received 15-year sentences after accepting plea deals. Jolene, refusing to cooperate, went to trial and was sentenced to 12 years for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. But Barrett's victory wasn't complete until 6 months later, when a financial settlement was finalized. $8 million transferred into Derek's trust. The house, the one Barrett and Jolene had shared, was awarded to Barrett. Jolene's career was destroyed, her reputation in ruins, her future behind bars. Chapter 9. The Earned Victory. 1 year after the documentary premiere, Barrett sat in the stands at Derek's high school baseball game. Beside him were Maura and Devin, who become close friends throughout the ordeal. Derek stood at home plate, the late afternoon sun catching his dark hair. The pitcher wound up. Derek swung hard, connecting with a crack that echoed through the field. The ball sailed over the fence, a home run. Derek's teammates erupted in cheers as he rounded the bases, a huge grin on his face. Barrett felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of pain he'd carried for 16 years finally releasing. After the game, Derek ran over, still in his uniform. "Did you see that?" "I saw it." Barrett pulled him into a hug. "Your grandfather would have been proud. He loved baseball." They'd spent the past year building what they'd lost. Barrett had moved slower than he wanted, giving Derek space to adjust, to grieve the life he'd known, to accept the life he should have had. Maura remained in Derek's life. She'd received probation for her role in the fraud, and Barrett hadn't pushed for more. She'd made terrible choices, but she genuinely loved Derek. That counted for something. The trust fund was untouched, waiting for Derek's 18th birthday. Barrett had used his own money to pay for therapy, for Derek, for himself, for Maura. Healing took time. "The college scouts are watching him," Maura said quietly beside Barrett. "He might get a baseball scholarship." "He's talented," Barrett agreed. "But even if he doesn't, he'll be okay. The trust will cover education, whatever he needs." Devin clapped Barrett on the shoulder. "You did good, man. The documentary won 3 Emmys, by the way. I heard your network wants you to do a follow-up series on adoption fraud." Barrett shook his head. "I'm taking a break. Spending time with my son is more important than another story." That evening, back at the house, Barrett and Derek made dinner together, a Saturday night tradition they'd established. As they worked in the kitchen, Derek asked, "Do you ever regret exposing everything the way you did?" Barrett considered the question carefully. No. What she did required a public response. She'd built her entire life on a lie, profited from it, hurt people. Private justice wouldn't have been enough. "What about Mom? Maura?" "I think Maura got what she deserved. Consequences, but also a chance to make amends. She's doing that by being honest now, by supporting you." Barrett met his son's eyes. People who own their mistakes deserve a path forward. People who don't. He shrugged. They get what they get. Later, after dinner, Barrett sat on the back porch and thought about Jolene. She'd written him letters from prison, angry at first, then bargaining, then finally silent. He'd never responded. There was nothing left to say to her. Sharon, Jolene's sister, had reached out several months ago. She'd watched the documentary and wept, she said. She testified against Jolene at the trial, revealing more about their mother's abuse, the toxic family dynamics. She'd started rebuilding a relationship with Derek, an aunt he never knew he had. The ripples of truth had spread farther than Barrett had imagined. Other families from Warner and Ferguson's fraud ring had received justice. New laws were passed requiring additional verification for stillbirth certificates. Barrett's documentary was being used in journalism schools as an example of investigative excellence. But for Barrett, the real victory was simple. Derek had his future back. The lost 15 years couldn't be recovered, but everything ahead was possible now. His phone buzzed. A text from his producer. "Network wants another documentary. You're calling the topic. Take your time." Barrett looked through the window at Derek, who was laughing at something on his phone, probably texting friends, normal teenage stuff. The life he should have always had. Barrett typed back, "I'll let you know. Right now, I'm busy being a dad." He put the phone away and went inside. Some victories weren't about destroying your enemies. They were about building something better from the ruins they'd left behind. But as he closed the door, Barrett allowed himself one final, cold smile. Jolene had thought she was smart enough to maintain the lie forever. She'd thought he'd never find out. She'd underestimated him. She'd learned the hard way. You don't lie to a man who exposes lies for a living. And you definitely don't steal 15 years from someone who knows how to take everything from you in return. The victory was earned. The justice was complete. And Barrett Novak was finally, truly free. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Saul Wilkerson had calloused hands that told stories of 30 years crawling through basements, fixing what others couldn't, and building something from nothing. At 52, he still carried the broad shoulders of the Marine he'd once been, though the desert tan had long faded to the pale complexion of a man who spent his days in cramped spaces beneath other people's homes. His own home sat on Maple Street, a modest two-story colonial he'd bought with his discharge money and renovated room by room. Every pipe, every wire, every board had been placed by his hands. It wasn't much by most standards, but it was his. Or so he'd thought. Jill had been different when they'd met 23 years ago. She'd been a waitress at Murphy's Diner, working double shifts to pay for nursing school. Saul had been immediately drawn to her determination, the way she'd wiped down tables with the same precision he applied to fitting pipes. She'd seemed impressed by his quiet competence, the way he could fix anything that broke. Their daughter Melissa had arrived 2 years after the wedding, a bright-eyed girl who used to follow Saul around the house, handing him tools and asking endless questions about how things worked. She'd been Daddy's little helper until middle school, when suddenly his rough hands and blue-collar work became sources of embarrassment rather than wonder. Jill had changed too, gradually. The nursing degree led to a job at the county hospital, which led to new friends, new ambitions, and new standards. She'd started making comments about upgrading their life, about wanting more than what a plumber could provide. Saul had worked longer hours, taken on bigger jobs, but it never seemed enough. The signs had been there for months. Late nights at the hospital. New clothes she claimed were on sale. A sudden interest in her appearance that went beyond professional necessity. Phone calls that ended abruptly when Saul entered the room. He'd noticed, cataloged each detail with the same methodical attention he applied to diagnosing a complex plumbing problem. But unlike pipes, he'd hoped this was something that would fix itself. Today was his 52nd birthday. Melissa was having friends over for what Jill had called a small celebration. Saul had come home early, showered off the grime from a particularly difficult job replacing century-old pipes in a downtown brownstone, and put on his best shirt, a blue button-down that Melissa had given him for Father's Day 3 years ago. He could hear teenage voices in the living room as he came downstairs, the kind of animated chatter that usually died when parents appeared. Saul paused at the bottom of the stairs, suddenly feeling like an intruder in his own home. Chapter 2. The Crack. The living room fell silent as Saul entered. 5 teenage girls sat arranged on his furniture like judges in a courtroom, their expressions ranging from polite indifference to barely concealed disdain. Melissa sat in the center, her face flushed with what Saul initially mistook for excitement. "Hey, sweetheart," Saul said, managing a smile. "Thanks for having everyone over for." "You're embarrassing me." Melissa cut him off, her voice sharp with teenage cruelty. The words hit Saul like a physical blow, but worse was coming. "You fix toilets. You think that makes you a man? Mom's new boyfriend owns 3 hotels." The room seemed to tilt. Saul's hearing went momentarily fuzzy, as if he were underwater. New boyfriend. The words echoed in his skull while the teenage girls watched with the fascination of spectators at a car crash. Jill's laugh came from the kitchen doorway, bright and musical and utterly without warmth. She appeared carrying a birthday cake that suddenly seemed like a prop in a very cruel play. "Well, it's time you know the truth," she said, setting the cake down with deliberate precision. "You were always just our piggy bank." Saul stood frozen, his blue button-down suddenly feeling like a costume he'd outgrown. Around him, the room he'd painted, the furniture he'd assembled, the life he'd built seemed to shimmer and dissolve like a mirage. The teenage girls were silent now, perhaps finally understanding they'd witnessed something more brutal than they'd bargained for. Jill's smile was radiant, the same smile she'd worn on their wedding day. "Charles has been showing me what it's like to be with a real man. Someone who doesn't come home covered in other people's filth." "Charles." Saul filed the name away with the same precision he'd once used to memorize the layout of complex pipe systems. He looked at his daughter, this girl he'd raised, whose bicycle he'd repaired countless times, whose scraped knees he'd bandaged, whose nightmares he'd chased away. She couldn't meet his eyes. "How long?" His voice came out steady, which surprised him. "Does it matter?" Jill shrugged. "Charles says I should have left you years ago. I was just comfortable, I guess. The steady paycheck. The reliable husband who never asked questions." One of the teenage girls, a blonde with too much makeup, whispered something to another girl, and they both giggled. The sound was like glass breaking. Saul realized he was still holding his work boots, still smelling faintly of the pipe cement he'd used that morning. In this moment, in this room that no longer felt like home, he was exactly what they saw, a middle-aged man who crawled through basements for a living. But as Saul looked at the cake, at the candles that remained unlit, at the faces surrounding him that ranged from cruel to pitying, something cold and familiar settled in his chest. It was the same feeling he'd had in Fallujah when his unit had walked into an ambush, the moment when shock crystallized into something much more dangerous. He didn't say a word, just turned and walked upstairs, leaving his work boots at the bottom of the steps like evidence of a life he was already beginning to shed. Chapter 3. The Departure. Saul's hands moved with mechanical precision as he packed, folding his clothes into neat squares and placing them in the same duffel bag he'd carried as a Marine. 23 years of marriage, and everything that truly belonged to him fit into 2 bags. The rest, the furniture, the decorations, the accumulated debris of a shared life, had never really been his anyway. From downstairs came the sound of renewed conversation, the party resuming as if he'd never existed. Jill's laughter rang out periodically, bright and carefree. Saul wondered if she'd practiced that laugh, if she'd been holding it back for months or years. He moved through the master bedroom like a ghost, taking only what was undeniably his. In the back of the closet, behind winter coats Jill had bought him, he found his old Marine footlocker. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was his K-bar knife, his service pistol, and a small leather notebook filled with names, numbers, and details from a life he'd left behind. Saul had never mentioned his specialized training to Jill, never talked about the 18 months he'd spent with force reconnaissance, or the skills that went far beyond basic infantry. Some skills never rusted. The phone started ringing as he zipped the second bag. Saul ignored it, but the sound seemed to cut through the teenage chatter downstairs. He heard Jill's voice, sharp with annoyance, then footsteps on the stairs. "Saul." Jill appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from irritation to uncertainty. "What are you doing? Leaving? You can't just... we need to talk about this. About how we're going to handle things. The house, Melissa's college fund, handle things." Saul's voice remained steady, conversational. "Like you handled things with Charles?" Jill's face flushed. "That's different. Look, marriage is in, Saul. People grow apart. It doesn't have to be ugly." "No," Saul agreed, shouldering his bags. "It doesn't have to be." Something in his tone made Jill step back. For just a moment, she seemed to see something in his face that reminded her that this quiet, steady man had once carried a rifle through some very dark places. "Where will you go?" "I'll figure it out." The phone had stopped ringing, but now it started again. Jill glanced toward the sound, distracted. "Charles is supposed to come over later. To meet Melissa properly. Maybe you should stay somewhere else tonight." "I won't be back tonight. Or any other night." Saul walked past her, down the stairs he'd carpeted himself, past the living room where 6 pairs of eyes watched him with varying degrees of interest. Melissa's face was pale now, as if the reality of what had happened was finally sinking in. "Dad." Her voice was small, uncertain. Saul paused at the front door, his hand on a knob he'd replaced just last month when the old one had started sticking. He looked back at his daughter, this girl who'd shared his blood, but not his heart when it mattered most. "Happy birthday to me," he said quietly, and walked out into the afternoon sun. The phone was ringing again as he loaded his bags into his work truck. Through the front window, he could see Jill frantically gesturing as she spoke into the handset. 29 missed calls, someone would later say. 29 attempts to reach the man who'd just walked away from everything he'd built. But Saul Wilkerson was already gone, and the man who drove away in that battered pickup truck was someone Jill had never really known at all. Chapter 4. The Reconnaissance. The Riverside Motel sat on the wrong side of town, the kind of place where truckers caught a few hours of sleep and people paid by the week when they'd run out of better options. Saul had chosen it deliberately, not because he couldn't afford better, but because he needed to think, and the Spartan room with its thin walls and traffic noise felt more honest than anywhere else. He'd been there 3 days when his phone finally rang with a number he recognized. "Gunny." "Christ, Wilk." I've been trying to reach you for a week. You fall off the planet, or something. Master Gunnery Sergeant Albert Moran had been Saul's squad leader in recon, a hard-edged career Marine who'd retired to a small security consulting firm in Virginia. They'd stayed in touch sporadically over the years, the kind of friendship forged in impossible places that distance couldn't really break. Had some domestic issues. Needed to sort things out. Yeah? Well, sorting's good. Listen, I got a situation here might interest you. Remember Dick Dorsey? Saul remembered. Dorsey had been their communications specialist, a quiet genius with electronics who'd saved their asses more times than Saul could count. After the Corps, he'd gone into private security, the kind of work that existed in the shadows between legal and necessary. Dick's been tracking something for me, Albert continued. Charles McCarty. Name ring a bell. Saul's grip tightened on the phone. Should it? Hotel owner out your way. Real estate developer. Also happens to be a complete piece of shit who's been running a little side business trafficking girls through his properties. Eastern Europeans, mostly. Kids who don't speak the language and don't know their rights. The motel room suddenly felt smaller. How do you know about McCarty? Dick's been building a case for a client. A woman whose sister disappeared into one of McCarty's operations. Problem is McCarty's smart. Uses cutouts. Keeps his hands clean. The kind of bastard who's bulletproof unless someone gets close enough to see how the machine really works. Saul said nothing, but his mind was already working, cataloging possibilities. Funny thing, though, Albert continued. Dick's been monitoring McCarty's communications. Seems he's got himself a new girlfriend. Married woman named Jill Wilkerson. You know her. We've met. Thought you might have. Small world. Anyway, reason I'm calling is Dick thinks McCarty might be getting sloppy. Love makes fools of us all, right? Might be an opportunity to get someone inside, close enough to document what he's really doing. Saul stared at the water stain on the motel ceiling, thinking about Jill's radiant smile, about the way she'd said Charles was a real man. What kind of opportunity? The kind that requires someone with your particular skill set. Someone who knows how to get into places he shouldn't be and disappear without a trace. Someone who understands that sometimes the law isn't enough. I'm listening. Dick's got everything set up, surveillance, electronic countermeasures, documentation. But he needs someone on the ground, someone who can get close to McCarty's operation without raising suspicions. Someone who has a reason to be sniffing around. Saul understood. A plumber had access to buildings, to basements and service areas where secrets might be hidden. A plumber who was asking questions about his wife's new boyfriend would seem motivated by jealousy rather than justice. What's the timeline? McCarty's planning something big. Dick intercepted communications about a new shipment arriving next week. If we're going to move, it has to be soon. Saul closed his eyes, seeing Jill's face, hearing Melissa's cruel words. Then he thought about other girls, other daughters, disappearing into Charles McCarty's shadow world. I'll need equipment. Already on its way. And Wilk, this isn't just about justice anymore. Word is McCarty's been bragging about his new woman, about how easy it was to take her from some loser husband. Seems he likes collecting trophies. The water stain on the ceiling looked like a map of somewhere Saul had never been, somewhere he might never return from. But as he thought about Charles McCarty, hotel owner, trafficker, collector of trophies, Saul Wilkerson began to disappear entirely, replaced by something much more dangerous. Chapter 5. The Infrastructure. Dick Dorsey hadn't changed much in 15 years. Still thin as a rail, still wearing clothes that looked like they'd been purchased from a government catalog, still carrying enough electronic equipment to run a small surveillance operation. Which, Saul reflected as he watched Dick unpack a dozen devices in the motel room, was exactly what this was. McCarty's got 3 properties, Dick said, spreading photographs across the cigarette-burn desk. The main hotel downtown, that's the Crown Plaza. Legitimate business, mostly. Clean books, good reviews, the whole 9 yards. Then there's the Ambassador, about 10 miles out on Route 9. Supposedly a budget business hotel, but occupancy records don't match the parking lot activity. And finally, there's this. The third photograph showed a converted warehouse on the industrial side of town, the kind of building that had been abandoned when manufacturing moved overseas and repurposed for God knew what. Building permits say it's storage for hotel supplies, Dick continued. But the electrical usage suggests something a lot more intensive. Climate control, soundproofing, security systems that would make Fort Knox jealous. Saul studied the images, his trained eye picking out details, multiple exit routes, sight lines, potential approach vectors. Security personnel? 2 shifts for men each. All ex-military, all carrying professional-grade equipment, encrypted communications. McCarty doesn't hire amateurs. Cameras? Everywhere. But here's the interesting part. Dick pulled out a tablet, showing a building schematic. The whole system runs through a central server in the basement of the Crown Plaza. And guess what's directly above that server room? Saul smiled for the first time in days. The main water line. Bingo. City records show repeated problems with the building's plumbing. Something about corroded pipes, causing pressure issues. The kind of problem that would require an experienced plumber to crawl around in the basement and figure out what's wrong. And how does an experienced plumber get called in for a job like that? Dick's grin was predatory. Funny thing about plumbing problems. Sometimes they just happen, especially when someone who knows exactly which pipes to hit with exactly the right amount of pressure decides to create a little controlled damage. Saul nodded, understanding. It was elegant, really. A few strategic strikes to create a problem that only he could solve, giving him legitimate access to the building's most sensitive areas. What about McCarty himself? That's where your wife comes in handy, Dick said, and there was no sympathy in his voice for Saul's situation. She's been spending a lot of time at the Crown Plaza. Lunch dates, dinner dates, overnight stays when McCarty tells her husband she's working late at the hospital. She's become a regular fixture. Dick pulled out another photograph, this one showing Jill emerging from the hotel's main entrance on McCarty's arm. She was wearing a dress Saul had never seen, laughing at something McCarty had whispered in her ear. The man beside her was tall, silver-haired, the kind of polished confidence that came from money and power. He's proud of her, Dick continued. Shows her off like a prize. Takes her to the restaurant, the bar, introduces her to his business associates. She's become part of his routine. Meaning, when the plumbing emergency happens, she'll be there. And when the plumber shows up to fix it, McCarty will see exactly what he expects to see. A working-class husband checking up on his cheating wife. Jealous, maybe. Angry, probably. But not a threat. Saul studied the photograph of Charles McCarty, memorizing the face, the posture, the expensive suit. Everything about the man screamed success, power, the kind of confidence that came from never having to answer for his actions. He has no idea what's coming, does he? None at all. As far as McCarty knows, you're just another suburban husband who got traded in for a better model. He's already forgotten you exist. Dick began packing up the equipment, but he paused at the door. Wilk, this isn't just about shutting down his operation. Your wife, your daughter, they chose this. They chose him. When this is over, there won't be any going back. Saul nodded, thinking about birthday cake and teenage laughter and the sound of his work boots hitting the floor. I know. Good. Because Charles McCarty is about to learn that some men aren't as forgettable as they look. Chapter 6. The Pressure Test. The Crown Plaza's basement smelled like every basement Saul had ever worked in. Damp concrete, old metal, and the faint chemical tang of cleaning supplies. The building's maintenance supervisor, a tired-looking man named Glenn Beach, led him through a maze of pipes and electrical conduits toward the source of their mysterious pressure problem. Started 3 days ago, Glenn explained, his flashlight beam dancing across the ceiling pipes. Pressure drops throughout the building, but only on the 3rd and 4th floors. Can't figure out what's causing it. Saul made appropriate noises of professional interest while cataloging every detail. Camera positions, cable runs, the location of the server room Dick had described. The building's infrastructure was more complex than most hotels, with redundant systems that suggested someone valued security over efficiency. You done work for Mr. McCarty before? Glenn asked as they reached the problem area. First time. Usually work residential. Saul played his role perfectly. The small-time plumber grateful for a high-profile job, maybe hoping to impress the hotel owner enough to become a regular contractor. The damaged pipe was exactly where Saul had left it 3 nights ago, after his careful reconnaissance had identified the perfect spot to create a slow leak that would gradually reduce pressure without causing immediate flooding. It was the kind of subtle sabotage that looked like normal wear and tear to anyone who didn't know better. "There's your problem," Saul said, pointing to the hairline crack he'd carefully created. "Copper corrosion. See how the metal's turned green around the joint? That'll spread if you don't fix it soon." Glenn nodded sagely, as if he understood anything about plumbing beyond calling someone when it broke. "How long to fix it?" "Couple hours. Maybe 3 if I run into complications. I'll need to shut off the water to this section, drain the lines, cut out the bad pipe, and solder in a replacement. Whatever it takes. Mr. McCarty's got important guests staying on the 4th floor this week. Can't have them dealing with low water pressure." Important guests. Saul filed that information away as Glenn led him back to the main mechanical room. The server room was 20 feet away, behind a steel door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," and protected by both a keycard reader and a numeripad. "I'll be upstairs if you need anything," Glenn said. "Try to keep the noise down. Hotel's pretty busy today." Alone in the basement, Saul began his work with the methodical precision that had made him one of the most sought-after plumbers in the county. But his real attention was focused on the patterns of movement above his head. Footsteps, voices, the subtle vibrations that told him where people were and what they were doing. At 11:30, he heard familiar laughter echoing through the building's ventilation system. Jill's voice, bright and animated, coming from what the building directory had indicated was the hotel's restaurant. Saul paused in his work, listening to his wife flirt with a man who was destroying other women's lives. By noon, he'd gained access to the server room. The keycard reader had been surprisingly easy to bypass. A simple matter of tracing the electrical circuit and providing the right voltage at the right connection points. The numeric pad had taken longer, but Dick's electronic surveillance had already provided the code sequence. The servers hummed quietly in their climate-controlled environment, processing data and storing secrets. Saul worked quickly, installing Dick's monitoring devices and creating backdoor access points that would allow them to observe McCarty's entire operation without detection. "Excuse me." Saul spun around to find a young woman standing in the server room doorway. She was small, maybe 20, with dark hair and eyes that held too much knowledge for someone her age. Her clothes were expensive but ill-fitting, as if they belonged to someone else. "I'm sorry," she said in accented English. "I was looking for bathroom." Eastern European, just as Albert had described. One of McCarty's girls, probably kept in the building under some pretense of employment or training. Saul looked at her face, pretty but hollow, like a flower that had been picked too early and was slowly dying. "Bathroom's upstairs," he said gently, "near the lobby." She nodded but didn't move. "You are, repairman?" "Plumber. Fixing the water pressure." "Water pressure." She repeated the words carefully, as if memorizing them. "This is good job?" "Honest job." The question hit Saul like a physical blow. Here was a girl who'd probably been promised honest work, legitimate employment, a chance at a better life. Instead, she'd found Charles McCarty and whatever hell he'd created for her. "Yes," Saul said quietly. "It's honest work." She smiled then, a fragile expression that transformed her face completely. I think honest work is a very good thing." Footsteps in the hallway made her stiffen with fear. She glanced toward the sound, then back at Saul. "I must go. Thank you for fixing water pressure." She was gone before Saul could respond, but her words echoed in the server room long after her footsteps faded. Honest work. A very good thing. Saul finished installing Dick's equipment and returned to his plumbing repairs with renewed focus. The pressure problem will be fixed, just as promised. But Charles McCarty's real problems were just beginning. Chapter 7. The Leak. The call came at 2 a.m., waking Saul from the first deep sleep he'd managed since leaving home. Dick's voice was tight with excitement and barely controlled rage. "We've got him." The monitoring equipment captured everything: financial records, shipping manifests, communications with his overseas contacts. "It's all there, Wilk. Every dirty detail of what that bastard's been doing." Saul sat up in the motel bed, instantly alert. "How bad?" "Worse than we thought. 43 girls in the last 2 years. most of them between 16 and 20. He's got a whole network: recruitment in Eastern Europe, transport through Canada, distribution to clients across the Eastern Seaboard. The warehouse we photographed? It's a processing center. They bring the girls there, break them down, train them, then ship them out to whoever's willing to pay. The young woman's face flashed through Saul's mind. Her careful English, her hollow eyes, her fragile smile when she'd talked about honest work. Where are they now? That's the thing. McCarty's planning a major shipment this weekend. The intercepted communications mention clearing inventory before a new group arrives. We're talking about at least 15 girls who are about to disappear into the system permanently. Saul was already reaching for his clothes. What's the plan? Officially, we turn everything over to the FBI and hope they can build a case before McCarty moves the girls. Unofficially, well, you didn't hear this from me, but Dick's been in touch with some people who take a more direct approach to problems like this. What kind of direct approach? The kind that involves tactical teams and explosive entries in McCarty's operation getting shut down tonight, evidence or no evidence. The kind that might result in some unfortunate accidents for anyone who gets in the way. Saul understood. It was a gray world operation, the kind of justice that happened in the shadows when the official system moved too slowly. Timeline: 0:30. Dick's team hits the warehouse while McCarty's at the Crown Plaza for his usual Thursday night dinner with your wife. They extract the girls and plan enough evidence to guarantee McCarty gets charged even if he survives the encounter. And if he doesn't survive, Albert's laugh was cold. Then a lot of young women get to go home to their families instead of disappearing forever. Sometimes the math is that simple. Saul thought about Jill in her new dress, laughing at McCarty's jokes while 15 girls waited in a warehouse to be shipped like cargo. Where do you need me? Crown Plaza. Dick's team needs someone inside to make sure McCarty stays put until they're finished at the warehouse. Someone who can get close without raising suspicions. The jealous husband routine. Exactly. Show up, make a scene, keep McCarty busy dealing with domestic drama while the real work gets done. Can you handle seeing your wife with him? Saul thought about the girl in the server room, about her careful words and frightened eyes. I can handle it. Good. And Wilk, when this is over, McCarty's going to be finished. His money, his reputation, his freedom, all gone. Your wife's going to find out exactly what kind of man she chose over you. She made her choice. That she did. See you on the other side. The line went dead, leaving Saul alone in the motel room with his thoughts and the weight of what was coming. He dressed carefully. Jeans, work boots, a flannel shirt that would mark him as the blue-collar husband Jill had found so embarrassing. In the mirror, he looked exactly like what McCarty would expect. A working man pushed too far, angry and unpredictable but ultimately harmless. Charles McCarty had built his fortune on understanding people, on recognizing weaknesses and exploiting them. Tonight, he would discover that some weaknesses were carefully constructed illusions, and some ordinary men carried extraordinary darkness. The Crown Plaza was about to host its last dinner party. Chapter 8: The Confrontation. The Crown Plaza's restaurant hummed with sophisticated conversation and a gentle clink of expensive crystal. Saul stood in the entrance, letting his eyes adjust to the warm lighting while he located his targets. The hostess approached with the kind of polite smile reserved for people who clearly didn't belong. Do you have a reservation, sir? I'm looking for my wife. He spotted them at a corner table, Jill radiant in a black dress he'd never seen, McCarty leaning across the table with predatory intimacy. They were sharing dessert and what looked like their third bottle of wine, completely absorbed in each other. Sir, if you don't have a reservation, there she is. Saul walked through the restaurant like a man in a dream, dimly aware of conversations, faltering as diners recognized the menace in his approach. Jill saw him first, her face cycling through surprise, embarrassment, and finally anger. What the hell are you doing here, Saul? Charles McCarty looked up with the mild annoyance of a man accustomed to having his evenings proceed without interruption. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His suit probably cost more than Saul made in a month, and his eyes held the flat calculation of someone who viewed other people as assets to be managed. You must be the husband, McCarty said, his voice carrying the slight accent of old money and private schools. Charles McCarty. Pleasure to meet you. He didn't offer to shake hands. Charles has been telling me about his expansion plans, Jill said, her voice pitched loud enough for nearby tables to hear. The new hotel in Miami, the resort development in Costa Rica. Real vision, unlike some people who are content fixing other people's toilets. Saul pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited, noting how McCarty's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket. Probably carrying, probably licensed, definitely inexperienced. Costa Rica? That's interesting. I hear the construction industry down there has some unique labor practices. McCarty's eyes sharpened slightly. I'm not sure what you're implying. Just making conversation. I meet a lot of contractors in my line of work. You'd be surprised what people talk about when they think nobody important is listening. Saul, stop it, Jill hissed. You're embarrassing yourself. Am I? Or am I just trying to understand what my wife finds so attractive about the hotel business? Saul's phone buzzed once in his pocket. Dick's signal that the warehouse operation was beginning. Must be fascinating work, managing all those different accommodations. McCarty set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. Mr. Wilkerson, I think perhaps you've had too much to drink. Haven't had a drop. But you're right, I probably should go. Jill, when you're done here, we need to talk. About Melissa's college fund, about the house, about what's going to happen next. There's nothing to discuss, Jill said. I've already contacted a lawyer. Have you? That's good. You'll want proper representation. Saul stood, noting how McCarty's eyes tracked his movements. Charles, it's been educational. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. He turned to leave, then paused as if remembering something. Oh, and Charles, you might want to check on your warehouse operation. I heard there might be some structural problems developing. The words hit McCarty like a physical blow. His face went pale, then flushed with anger and sudden understanding. What did you just say? But Saul was already walking away, moving through the restaurant with the unhurried pace of a man who had accomplished exactly what he'd come to do. Behind him, he heard McCarty's chair scrape against the floor, heard Jill's confused questions, heard the beginning of a conversation that would shatter both their worlds. His phone buzzed again, 2 short pulses. Dick's team had found the girls. By the time Charles McCarty reached the warehouse, it would be empty except for enough evidence to guarantee he'd spend the rest of his life in federal prison. By the time Jill understood what kind of man she'd chosen, she'd be facing her own legal problems as an accessory after the fact. Saul walked out into the night air, breathing deeply for the first time in weeks. Honest work, the girl had said. A very good thing. Some kinds of work were more honest than others. Chapter 9. The Final Fix. 3 months later, Saul sat in a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, reading about Charles McCarty's sentencing on his tablet. 25 to life in federal prison. No possibility of parole. The news article included a photograph of McCarty in an orange jumpsuit, his silver hair unkempt, his face gaunt with the reality of what his life had become. The warehouse raid had been devastating in its thoroughness. 15 girls rescued, enough evidence to implicate a network spanning 3 countries, and financial records that had led to dozens of arrests. McCarty's empire had collapsed in a single night, taking down clients, partners, and enablers across the eastern seaboard. Jill had been arrested 2 weeks later when investigators discovered she'd been laundering money through the hospital's charitable foundation. Small amounts over several months, but enough to qualify as accessory to trafficking. Her nursing license was revoked, her assets frozen, her respectable life reduced to legal fees and plea negotiations. The house on Maple Street had been seized as part of the federal investigation. Melissa was living with Jill's sister in Ohio, her college fund gone, her social media profile scrubbed of any reference to her father the plumber or her mother's glamorous new boyfriend. Saul's phone rang, interrupting his reading. Albert's number. How you doing, Wilk? Can't complain. You. Business is good. That situation in Portland work out for you. Saul looked around the coffee shop, at the faces of people who had no idea who he was or what he'd done. His new identity was solid. Papers that would withstand any scrutiny, a background that painted him as a retired plumber who'd moved west for his health. It worked out fine. Quiet place. Good people. Glad to hear it. Listen, Dick's got another situation developing. Similar profile to McCarty, but bigger. International scope. Could use someone with your particular skills if you're interested. Saul thought about the girl in the server room, about her frightened eyes and careful words. Somewhere in the world, there were other girls, other Charles McCartys, other systems that turned human beings into commodities. What's the timeline? Next month. Dick's setting up the surveillance now, but he'll need someone on the ground who can get close to the target. Someone who understands that justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Send me the details. Already on its way. And Wilk, that thing with your wife and daughter, any regrets? Saul closed the tablet, erasing McCarty's face from the screen. They made their choices. I made mine. Good man. Talk soon. The coffee shop was filling with the afternoon crowd. Students from the local college, office workers grabbing their caffeine fix, ordinary people living ordinary lives. None of them would ever know that the quiet man in the corner booth had once been a husband and father, or that he'd walked away from everything he'd built to ensure that 15 girls could go home to their families. Saul finished his coffee and stepped out into the Portland afternoon. Somewhere across the country, Jill was probably sitting in a jail cell, finally understanding the true cost of trading up. Somewhere in Ohio, Melissa was learning that choices had consequences, that cruelty left scars, that not all fathers were as forgiving as the one she'd humiliated on his birthday. But those were old problems, old pain. Saul Wilkerson had worked